take a moment of your time to talk a little bit about movies. The part of the collection that I work on is actually nitrate motion picture film. And for those of you who don't know what it is, it's actually a very highly flammable film stock that was made generally between 1895 and 1951. Although you may not have heard of this particular film stock, you've probably heard of a lot of film titles that were created on this stock. So I'm just going to do a quick survey here. How many of you have ever heard of the movies, Gone with the Wind or Wizard of Oz? Just raise your hands. You've kind of heard of these, right? Well, for those of you who don't know, both of these films are out of the vaults. They're currently in Hollywood being scanned for release on Blu-ray, DVD, get them while they're hot, just out for the 70th anniversary holiday extravaganza. You can probably buy them in your local Best Buy or Target. But what I'd like to talk to you today is not actually about those films. I'd like to talk to you actually about a film that is located in the same vault as Wizard of Oz, but is about 3 rows down. So I'm going to ask another quick question here. How many of you have ever heard of a movie called The Sign of the Cucumber? Sign of the Cucumber. Anybody ever heard of this film? Okay, yeah, maybe not too many people in the audience have heard of that. So I'd like to take a moment of your time to talk to you a little bit about this movie and other movies that are kind of like this and what film preservation and what archivists around the world are trying to do to keep these films alive. So what we have here is the title card for The Sign of the Cucumber. And it stars Bob McKenzie, Eva Novak, and it's in 2 parts, which means it's approximately 30 minutes long. It was made in 1917 by LKO Motion Picture Company in Hollywood, California. And what this film is about is you've got Sheriff Bob. This is Sheriff Bob with the big black hat, believe it or not. And that's his deputy on the right there. And what Bob is that he's the town sheriff, and his job is to make sure that law and order takes place in his little town. Him and his deputy have a really good job. They go around making sure that everybody's doing what they need to do. But what makes Sheriff Bob even more happy is that he's in love. He's in love with the prettiest girl in town, and her name is Eva. And they're going to be getting married. Isn't this great for Bob? Don't you feel great for Bob? He's got the best job in the world, the prettiest girl in town, and he's about to get married. So what could possibly go wrong for Bob? Well, Bob gets a letter. And what's happening in this letter is that it tells him, Red-Nosed Pete and his pal are coming to town. Beware, the pal could be your double. And Bob says, oh no, not Red-Nosed Pete and his pal. Now, Red-Nosed Pete is not a very nice guy. Red-Nosed Pete will kidnap your daughter, steal your horse, burn down your ranch, take all the money out of your bank and not think twice about it. And he's got a pal that looks just like the sheriff. What's the sheriff going to do? He says, aha. This is an intertitle from this silent movie. It says, well, he may be my double, but he doesn't have a cucumber for a birthmark. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, that is the plot point to this movie here, is that Sheriff Bob has on his arm a cucumber birthmark. Now, probably nobody in this audience has ever seen a movie where a cucumber has the lead point in the movie, but sure enough, it is in our film here today. And what's going on here is that Red-Nosed Pete comes into town. The first thing he decides to do is he's going to rob the bank. Because, you know, he's a little short on cash and he figures, what the heck, I'll take some money first before I hit the town and take the rest of what this town has to offer. So when he's in the bank and he's starting to rob the money, he realizes on a picture on the wall the same connection, that the Sheriff Bob and the pal could be twin brothers. So Red-Nosed Pete comes up with an idea. He says, there's a $10,000 reward on my head. If I can get my pal to pose as the sheriff, I can take that $10,000 reward, take everything else in town and skedaddle before anybody even knows I'm here and that I've taken everything that they belong. So he decides to do this. All he has to do is put a fake cucumber on the pal. So that's what he does. Now it looks a little different than the first cucumber there, doesn't it? It's actually a real slice of cucumber he puts on his pal's arm, and then they go running amok. So what happens is, the pal dresses up as the sheriff, as you can see here, and he decides to take over the town. He captures the real sheriff, throws him in jail with Red-Nosed Pete to make it look authentic, goes to the town and says, ha-ha, I've caught Red-Nosed Pete and his pal. He throws them again in jail, right, that you can see there, and turns out that he takes the $10,000 reward and everybody's happy. Wow, look what our sheriff's done. Isn't he a great guy? Well, there's a little spot that's going wrong in their little plan here, because what they didn't realize was that Sheriff Bob was getting married that same day. So now you've got the wedding going on, and Eva's waiting for the sheriff to show up to get married. So what happens here is that now he's got to pose as the sheriff in front of the bride. And he's got to try to convince her that he is the sheriff. And, you know, hey, maybe he'll get a bride out of this too. So let's see what happens next. Just a few minutes before the wedding, that deputy, the one that you saw, well, he's on to something here. Something's not quite right with the sheriff. So he confronts him at the wedding, and he says, "Who are you? You need to prove that you're the sheriff. Where's that cucumber mark? I want to see it." Well, he opens up his arm and says, "I've lost my cucumber." At some point, of course, it's fallen off, and now he has to convince everybody that he really is the sheriff without the cucumber mark. Well, this, of course, doesn't go very well. The town gets upset. All the cowboys around get all angry and wanting some justice to be done, but, of course, nobody's angrier than Eva's father because, well, her daughter just got a fool made out of her, so he grabs his gun and decides to go running around with the cowboys to chase down this so-called fake sheriff. This fake sheriff lets Red-Nosed Pete out of jail so that they can escape together, and they hide out and have a big shootout, of course, towards the end of our film. What's going to happen next? Are they going to survive? Well, the sheriff, of course, manages to break out of prison and solve all the problems, capture the real Red-Nosed Pete and his pal, throw him in jail, and make it in time perfect for the wedding. So you have, of course, your happy ending at the end of this movie. So doesn't this sound like something you'd maybe want to see? It sounds a little different, though, doesn't it? Maybe not something you would see at your local movie theater today, but this was something that audiences enjoyed and they truly loved to watch at the time this film was made. But why won't you see these types of films today? What's going on here? Well, there's a lot of reasons for this. And part of it is that you have here is what's often called as an orphan film. An orphan film is one that was produced by a studio that no longer exists. These are things often called newsreels, home movies, kind of personal footage of that nature. And I can go over, I had so many titles to choose from the collection I work on. I could have picked up, stood here and talked to you about another film called The Haunted Pajamas, or another film called When Flowerland Awakens in Japan. There's so many to choose from, but I just chose this one because I thought it was a perfect example of what an orphan film is and the types of cinema that was made in this country that nobody seems to know of anymore. Now, this was made by a studio called LKO Motion Picture Company. This studio only existed from 1914 to 1919. It was a troupe of actors who worked in Hollywood, California, and they made approximately 3 movies a week, working on different films at all times, creating mostly Westerns because that was the most popular genre of the time. Now, that sounds like a lot of movies. I heard a lot of, surprise on how many movies this one little studio made a week. In 1917, there were 21,000 movie theaters in the United States, each with an average of 500 seats per cinema. So there was a lot of seats to fill, and there was a large audience wanting and willing to watch these kinds of movies. Most of these films nowadays, now this one in particular is in public domain, but a lot of them are in copyright limbo. You have a lot of studios that don't exist anymore, so nobody's quite sure who owns the copyright and how can it be released anymore. The Sign of the Cucumber is in public domain from 1917, so it also not only has no copyright issues, but it also has nobody really with a financial backing to that. So you have to keep some of these films in mind to try to help do preservation, to kind of look for these types of movies, these quiet little gems that may be hiding around in your local theater, in your local archive or university. It also stars a lot of actors that are no longer popular today. These don't have your Greta Garbo's in it, and there's no Clark Gable in it, and there's no Humphrey Bogart. But what this film does have is Eva Novak. Now, Eva Novak was a very popular star in the 1920s. She was from St. Louis, Missouri. She moved to Hollywood in 1914 with her sister to try their luck at the motion pictures. She quickly moved up the ranks and starred in a lot of Westerns with probably an actor people would recognize more. His name was Tom Mix. And she was rescued as a damsel in distress in quite a few of these films. So she would have been a very big draw to audiences at the time. Now, 10 years after this movie was made, in 1927, sound was starting to come into Hollywood. And Eva Novak was very, very nervous about making that transition into sound. It was a very hard time for a lot of actors. So she decided not to do this change. She decided instead to go to Australia and make silent films down under. The Australian film industry was trying very hard to get more American actors to their studios to try to drum up business in their own country. So she and her husband went down there for several years and starred in quite a few popular Australian silent movies. But by the mid-1930s, she had returned to Hollywood, but by this point, because fame is fleet, very quietly, she decided to return back to the cinema, and it was only in smaller films and lesser-known films, often playing a maid or playing a neighbor next door, not really playing the damsel in distress for Tom Mix at this point. Making westerns, of course, was very popular at the time, but you don't really see them so much anymore. Most audiences today are more interested in films about vampires or aliens. Films today are all about cell phones and the internet. And a lot of films today, I mean, I love TV shows like Flash Forward, but they always seem to be about doomsday, about the world's coming to an end and what are we going to do. Films like this were more family-oriented, and they were more about having a good time together. If you were to watch this movie, which was preserved at George Eastman House in 2004, you see the actors are genuinely having a good time together while making this kind of funny, crazy Western about cucumbers and cowboys and having this huge, chaotic ending to the end. Not saying that movies today don't have that kind of image of a family environment, but you see a lot of this in these older, kind of well-known, lesser-known Westerns of the day. So the question comes down is, where can you find films like these? Where can you find films about haunted pajamas and signs of cucumbers and things of the sort? Well, you have a few websites you can try. It's not saying that the internet is not good for film. It's actually been wonderful for film preservation. These are some of the websites you can go to, such as realclassics.com. Filmpreservation.org is a great opportunity to look at some of the films that have been preserved and released on DVD. You can even check them out on Netflix if you like. LibraryOfCongress.gov will give you a lot of information on current projects preserved by the Library of Congress. Film Forever and AmiaNet.org are also organizations that help you introduce you to other archivists and other films that are being preserved. I do a lot of work with students. I teach a lot of people about how to handle nitrate, how to work with the film, and kind of stress the love you can have for not only your big Hollywood films, which you should definitely see, but to give you a chance and an opportunity to see some of the lesser-known titles. Because films like The Sign of the Cucumber really, although they are preserved on film, they're not truly preserved until they have an audience. And so I hope that I can give you that information today. So the next time that you're saying to yourself, I want something new, ask yourself, do you want something new or do you want something different? Because it may not be new what you're looking for. It could be something from a long time ago, but new to you. Thank you.